Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Etiquette Guy. I'm your host, Jay Remer, and I have with me today, Mary Rogers.
Hi, Jay. How are you today?
Welcome back to the show, Mary.
Thank you very much for having me back.
Well, I'm doing very well, and it's always nice to see you.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, I thought maybe we're approaching spring, summer, June brides. Let's talk about wedding invitations. What do you think about that?
Wedding invitations. We can do that.
Okay, because the wedding, there's an actual etiquette, I understand, towards the subject of wedding invitations and the wording, too, on the wedding invitation. It's so important to get it exactly right.
Right.
You know? So let's ask you some of these questions that have come in with regards to the invitations themselves. In terms of time frame, when do you think they should be ordered, wedding invitations? Wedding
invitations should be mailed between 6 and 8 weeks before the wedding. Now
Sent out, mailed.
Sent out,
okay.
Yeah, mailed. That means in an envelope with a stamp.
All right.
That is the way wedding invitations should be delivered. In an envelope with a stamp.
No hand delivery.
Hand delivery is okay, but delivery by Facebook or a text message, it's not okay.
Okay.
And I think actually text messages and email and Facebook is probably not very common as much as an email invitation. These evites have taken often they're using the excuse, and I'm not saying it's a good excuse or a bad excuse, but it is an excuse of the environment. We don't want to waste another tree. Well, you know, there's an awful lot of print shops now that use recycled paper products to produce the paper. So that excuse, as far as I'm concerned, is a rather lame one. So invitations should be mailed out 6 to 8 weeks prior to the wedding. So depending on how complicated the invitation is, and I don't mean complicated by how many words you're going to put on it, but whether it has, whether there's going to be, with that invitation, if there's going to be information about the wedding reception, if there's a dinner involved, if there are choices to be made for the dinner, or you know, how many guests are you bringing, you know, if it's sometimes there's a card that will say, you know, how many guests you are. Because if it was to, sometimes invitations can be rather casual, where it's kind of, you know, if you want to bring a date, it's fine, kind of a thing. They call those plus ones, I think, where if you're a single person,
I see. Okay.
you can bring
a guest.
A guest, yeah. I'm, well, it doesn't really matter how I feel about that. I'm ambivalent on that. But I do think that the invitations should be reflective of the importance of the ceremony. And if we assume that this wedding invitation is going out to a couple who are getting married both for the first time, and hopefully the only time, it's a big deal. You know, your first wedding is a big deal, and you should treat it that way. So emailing invitations is really sort of, it takes away from the importance, to my way of thinking, of the event. And it may be more efficient time-wise, but this is one of those milestones in your life where time efficiency is not important. I think that you should take the time, you should have exactly the kind of invitation that you want, and there are a host of invitations that you can have. You can have very formal, or you can have quite informal. Or, I mean, when you know, in the years that I've been in the hospitality industry here in St. Andrews, there have been any number of very tiny little weddings where there really wasn't any reason for an invitation at all, because there would just be the bride, the groom, the people standing up for them, and possibly the parents. We had a wedding once where there were literally only 4 people: the bride, the groom, and the witnesses. And So I think so that can happen, but assuming that you're having a more traditional kind of a wedding where you actually are sending out invitations, plan a couple of months ahead of the mailing date exactly how you want this invitation to look, because depending on who you're working with, it can be either a breeze or it can be quite complicated. I have always used for an important party like that, and I consider weddings to be important, I've always gone to a print shop that specializes in that sort of thing. They have books full of different choices, right? So you find one that you like. Or if there's a font, for example, that, because fonts can tell a lot about the personality of the wedding and of the couple getting married. And if you want to kind of go that sort of slightly non-traditional route, well, it could be quite non-traditional, pick a font somewhere else that you like and take it into the print shop and say, this is the font I want used for my wedding invitation. Now, as far as the information on the wedding invitation goes, it should be clear, and it should be as brief as possible, although the date is spelled out completely. So, for instance, it might be if it's a fairly simple, where we're not dealing with divorced parents and second marriages and all that kind of complication, then it would be Mr. and Mrs. Sam Jones requests the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter Ruth Ann to John Smith. And then it could then be followed by son of, Mr. and Mrs. Roger Smith, or not. That does not have to be there. There are different ways of doing it, but the date of the thing is, all the words are spelled out. So it would be, if it was May 24th, 2013, all of those words are spelled out. There are no numerals used. It's all spelled out. And the same is if it's at 4:30 in the afternoon, 4:30 is spelled out. It's not, you don't use the numbers. So, and that's in the traditional formal wedding invitation. Now, it doesn't mean that if you don't use that format that your marriage isn't going to be a successful one. It just, that's formal. And then you can go all the way down to informal, to the point where there is no invitation at all. So anything kind of goes, but I think that the invitation needs to be reflective of the tone of the wedding. Yeah.
All right. So the font, and I guess somebody actually asked a question about the font, like the font choice and the color choice of an invitation, or ink, the color of ink that you should put on the invitation. So well, I guess it goes with
traditionally,
the formal,
it's ivory paper or white with black ink. And the font, there's a traditional cursive font that I don't know the name of it, but anybody who's in that business from the printing end of it would know what the name of it was. And they will also have font catalogs, so you can actually go through a catalog and you can see what every one of the letters is going to look like in that particular font.
There seems to be an
there are thousands
endless supply
of them.
Of fonts.
You can drive yourself nuts. It's worse than paint chips. I mean, they really are. And people are inventing new ones all the time. And you can actually go online and find fonts. You can find a person who will give you your very own font. You pay for that, of course. Yeah, sure. And there are special fonts that you cannot download unless you pay for them. So it can be quite complicated. Now, I know that when one friend of ours got married, they had Greg was asked to design a special invitation for them, which he did, and it was gorgeous. But it was, it can involve, this one involved a wax seal. So you have to get the wax and the seal, and the number of mistakes that are made. It's not like every single one comes out just perfectly, right? So you need to buy extra stationery. Sometimes if you go to a fine stationery store, like there there are no specialty stationery stores that I'm aware of in the Maritimes, but I suppose in Toronto there probably is, New York City, Boston, where you can actually go to a place where they actually make stationery, and it's fabulous, and it's really expensive, and they sell it by the sheet. You can go that route if you want to. If you want to have it something that's really, I mean, then the invitation almost becomes a souvenir, right? Yes. So you can be that formal, but on the invitation is that who's getting married. The parents of the bride usually goes on, especially on a first wedding, the location and the date, and the time, and RSVP, and where the RSVP is to go. So if it says RSVP, now if it's going to the address that it came from and the envelope that it came in is carefully labeled, like it said, well, not labeled, but if it's indicated, you know, this came from, then it just says RSVP. If the return is to go somewhere else, then the address is indicated. If you want the RSVP to come via email, you put the email. So it works that way. And then in the lower right-hand corner of the invitation is where the attire goes. So if it is, and oftentimes there is no need for that at all, because if it's an afternoon wedding, then you just show up in proper wedding clothes. I know that say in England, where they have sort of different tiers of dress through the day, and so, for instance, in the morning you might wear a morning dress. Well, if you put morning dress on an invitation over here, they wouldn't know what you're talking about. So I think you have to, you know, you play to your audience. Very rarely would there be a black tie event, because unless it's an evening wedding, you don't wear a black tie before 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So you can't have a 4 o'clock wedding and say on the invitation, black tie. It's just, that's really bad form. So even if you're having a fancy dinner afterwards, unfortunately, your guests are going to have to go home and change. So if you want it to be black tie, have the wedding a little bit later. I mean, if you want to do it correctly, use, you know, following traditional guidelines, which are traditions for a reason. They work. So, so that's the kind of information that goes on a wedding. I mean, that's the kind of information that goes on an invitation. Sure. Those words come out?
Yeah, that's fine. What about assembling the invitation? Because there's tissue paper, there are reply cards, there are registry cards, the invitation itself. How do you assemble a wedding invitation?
Well, you have an outside envelope.
Yes. And
that has who's being invited to the wedding. If it says Mr. and Mrs. James Brown, that's who's invited to the wedding. It isn't Mr. and Mrs. James Brown and entourage, or any part of an entourage. Okay. So don't call and say, can I bring my kids? All right. If your kids were invited, they'd be on the invitation. They're not, so don't bring them. So you've got the outside envelope, then usually on the inside of that there's another envelope. And it'll just have Mr. and Mrs. Brown, or it might say Mr. and Mrs. James Brown. And then inside of that is the actual invitation. And inside of which sometimes can be a folded affair, or sometimes it can just be a simple card, but then also in that envelope is going to be possibly a return envelope that may or may not be stamped and addressed. So you can have these return envelopes engraved also, and you can stamp them if you want.
Is stamping a requirement?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, stamping is not a requirement.
All right.
No, stamping is stamping of wedding invitation return envelopes is not so common as if somebody's asking you for money. You know, like if a charity is saying, we want you to send us, you know, some money, and then they send you an envelope that's all addressed and has a stamp on it, kind of gets you going a little bit more. We want to have the fewest number of hurdles. I think for these, you put your own stamp on.
Okay.
And then also included there will maybe be who's coming, because it may be Mr. and Mrs. Jones that are coming. The invitation may say Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and then there may be a whole bunch of junior Joneses invited who are not old enough to receive their own invitations yet, so they would be on the, and so you'd say Mr. and Mrs. Jones and 2 children or something like that, so that they have a head count. And then sometimes there will be do you want fish or beef?
Yes,
you know, for the
Menu
dinner, if there's going to be a dinner,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and a place for allergies and, you know, all that sort of thing. So that is all that information needs to go into this envelope. Sometimes also will be included information about lodging, directions, you know, local attractions. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that can do this, but traditionally that sort of thing is generally not. It will have directions. Now the tissue paper bit, that's in there, that's an old throwback kind of a thing, when ink didn't dry as quickly and they didn't want it running and everything, so they put that tissue paper in there to keep the ink from smudging. But it's just put in there now as filler, really. So that's
the registry card. Oftentimes there's no, or I said a no to put in.
No.
An invitation?
Not in the invitation.
Not in the invitation.
No.
No registry card.
No, registries can go on websites, and they can. I mean, I'm not saying that they don't do it. I'm just saying that it's not. It isn't.
It's not etiquette.
It's not the way I do it. I think that registries are the kind of thing that's another word of mouth kind of thing. Or with these modern websites, they do put it on there, and it seems to be what goes on. It is a convenience, and but I just think that once you start letting that cat out of the bag, it is really, you're on a very slippery slope toward commercialization of weddings. And as you know, I'm against that. So I think that you know, gifts are something that go along with weddings. People know that they should be bringing a wedding gift if you're getting married and you're going to the wedding. If you accept a wedding invitation, you should show up with a gift or send one ahead of time. So, and traditionally, registries were set up, well, they were originally set up in the 1930s at Marshall Field's in Chicago as a convenience. This was a clever bit of marketing so that they could make it easier for everyone concerned to buy stuff at their place, right? Well, we're registered at Marshall Field's, and this is the silver we want, and these are the glasses, and these are the dishes, and this is the linen, and so forth. Well, today it's morphed into something quite a lot different, this whole registry business, and I think that it has cheapened the whole vibe around weddings, because it's all about getting loot.
Yes.
And I don't think I mean, you hear of people that, oh well, we'll just invite her. We know she's not going to come, but we'll get a nice wedding present. That's really a bad attitude, and it's very greedy. And I am not going to sit here and say that being greedy is a good thing, because it's not. It's just not the way to go. So I think that there's so the registry doesn't go in the
registry.
Not in the invitation. Not in my book. Not on my watch, as they say. Yeah. So yeah.
When do you think we should start the whole process of thinking about, like after you've been proposed, or you know, the engagement has been announced, when should the process of the wedding invitation start?
Well, I think it all depends on when the wedding is going to be. Now,
okay.
I have one friend that just got engaged, and the wedding isn't until 2014 in the fall. So there's nothing to do about that just yet. I have other friends who get engaged and they're being married in 2 weeks. So it's, well, that means that it's going to be a small wedding, and there may not be an invitation involved at all. But normally, the way things usually happen is that there may be there should be, usually they say there should be sort of like an 8 to 9 month period between the engagement and the wedding. Because if it's before that, you may indicate that there may be a bun in the oven. Which you see. So that's kind of the way it was designed originally.
Right.
But in this day and age, I think in many cases, a couple will begin to raise a family before they're married. Now, from a traditional point of view, I'm in favor of the couple getting married at least civilly before the child is born, so that the child is born in wedlock. That's just an old traditional point of view that I happen to have and will espouse until I'm done. There are other people who don't believe that, who feel that, you know, this is the fact that we're a loving couple is enough to raise a family, and it's true. If every couple were a loving couple and raised their children lovingly, we'd be in a much different world than we're in today. So I think that there is something about tradition that does help. It helps define things for people, and that gives them comfort a lot of times. And I think that that's always, you know, a nice thing. You know, it's not that easy to find sometimes. So I think that so to get back to your question of when do you begin planning, I think that you begin planning as soon as you've announced the engagement. Because getting a venue, getting a wedding dress, ordering flowers, those all can take a long time. I mean, there are weddings that I remember going to a wedding once where the flowers were ordered a year in advance, because there were so many flowers that they had to make sure that they were going to be available. So, and there are certain, you know, there's a lot of logistical stuff like that. Sometimes the venue you want may not be available on the date that you want it. Well, you need to know that, so that you either switch venues or switch dates. And wedding dresses can be enormously complicated, and depending on the personality of the bride and how involved the bride's mother is and all the rest of it, it can dictate, you know, that. Now, if you just want to go get a, you know, there are old family wedding dresses that can be refit. There are, you know, new Vera Wang dresses that you can buy off the rack and get married that afternoon. Or, you know, you can go to Oscar or Carolina Herrera and can take a long time, depending on what your requirements are. So I think it's all over the map. As far as how long that takes. But I would say planning it as far in advance as possible is going to make it so that there are the fewest surprises closer to the date.
Okay. Now, how do you feel about one of your guests designing an invitation for you?
I think it's fantastic. You know, I mean, I think that, you know, it's very contemporary. And I think that it can be very stylish. I mean, that's when I was talking earlier about Greg having designed this this way. Well, I mean, you know, that is a prime example, and I think it's fantastic. It's a lot of work for the guest, so they obviously, you know, will agree to that, and I would offer to pay them.
Okay, that was going to be my next question.
I would definitely offer to pay them.
In lieu of gift, like should, you know, or should the bride and groom wait for maybe the graphic artist to offer their services? Oh, I can design your invitation. Or is it okay for the bride and groom to say, Will, we really admire your work. It would really mean a lot to us if you designed our wedding invitation,
I think
and then offer to pay.
Yeah, I mean, if they have, if you're going to a friend who is in the biz, then you're obviously, we want you to do the invitation and we're going to pay you. I mean, it would be like somebody calling me up and saying, would you mind coordinating our wedding? Well, they know that if they call me, they're going to have to pay. And they don't necessarily know how much, but it wouldn't be something that I wouldn't be waiting around for them to offer, and they shouldn't be waiting around for. I mean, there's going to be, that is dealt with right up front. So I think that if you're asking someone who happens to be a very talented artist or designer or whatever, you say, we really want you to design our wedding invitation for you, and we want this to be done professionally, and we want to pay you. Because when you pay someone to do something, it changes the level of responsibility in their mind.
Okay.
Okay? This is now no longer a favor, this is a responsibility. And I think that it's very important, not only in wedding invitations, but in a lot of things in life, that we know the difference between the two and that we keep them separate.
Okay.
It's very important. So I think it's a great idea to have a friend, you know, if you have a talented friend who would be really able to design a fantastic wedding invitation, I'd say go for it. I think it's a great idea. But don't expect them to do it for nothing. That's really unfair.
Okay, and settle the fee right up front. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yes, and I think, you know, as far as that's one service that's required at a wedding. But take, for example, photography. We all have iPhones today, right? So we can all take pictures. But if you want somebody who you know takes great pictures, maybe they're in the business of being a wedding photographer. Maybe that's a job that they have. I mean, I have a lot of friends that are wedding photographers, and believe you me, if I were to get married again, I'd have one of them. I don't know which one necessarily, but I'd definitely have one. And I would absolutely not want them to do it. I wouldn't even discuss it with them unless we cleared up in the very beginning that this is a professional job. I wouldn't, but I don't do that with anything. I mean, I don't mind helping someone out and doing a favor for someone. But it's like going to the doctor. You don't go to the doctor because, you know, he's a doctor and he's your friend and so he'll do it for free. Absolutely not. That's just you just don't do that. That is really stepping over the line of fairness. So I think that we all have friends who are talented at different things, and if yours happens to be a good photographer or videographer, and you think that you'd like to have them do it, sign them up, but pay them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, sending out the invitations, should the bride always be in on sending the invitations out, or can she assign, for example, a committee, perhaps her mother and aunt?
To do what?
To send the actual invitations out.
Oh no, you can hire people to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, you can do. You can either hire a friend to do it. You can do it yourself. You can do it with your mother or whatever.
Okay.
Guess what?
Time's up.
We've run out of time again. We got to going.
Okay.
Anyway, so we'll definitely revisit this.
Okay,
and thank you very much for asking these questions, and thank you all for sending the questions in and being so interested in the topics that we discuss. And we look forward to having you back here again on the Etiquette Guy. Thank you very much for joining us, and bye for now.